Good morning, everyone. John Horgan here on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. And I'm joined here today by Minister Melanie Mark and Jonathan Burke, the board chair of the H.R. MacMillan Space Centre. As we all know, the days are getting warmer and a little bit longer, and over 55% of eligible British Columbians have received their first vaccine. Now, while we still need to bear down against the pandemic, all signs are pointing to positive days ahead this coming summer. We have challenges to be sure, but we need to focus for the next number of days on following rules, making sure we're not traveling unnecessarily, and hoping for a better future coming after the May long weekend. Everybody in BC, of course, has fond memories of visiting and working at BC's major tourism attractions. From museums to amusement parks to science centres, these sites are part of BC's world-renowned tourism industry. And right now, people in tourism are hurting. In fact, few sectors have been hit as hard by COVID-19 as the tourism sector. Many of our major tourism attractions, as we all know and love, are struggling, and we need to make sure we're there for them. The effects, of course, are far-reaching, not just on those anchor attractions, but to the many communities that depend on tourism landmarks to have people coming through their community to boost the local economy and bring visitors to town. They provide many young people with their first jobs. I worked on the Coho Ferry, a tourism operation from Port Angeles to Victoria when I was in high school, telling people how to get to Butchart Gardens when they came off the ferry. And I'm not alone. Many other British Columbians had the same experience, their first job, and also an introduction to how important it is to welcome back visitors to our province. But not just yet. It's not far off, but we need to stay vigilant and we need to be mindful that our international borders remain closed and there are public health orders in place to restrict non-essential travel. It's critically important to our well-being that we do so. But we also need to now start to focus on what we do coming out of the pandemic and how can we help businesses not just survive, but to recover strongly as we come out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we're launching a new program to support BC's tourism landmarks. The new BC Major Anchor Attractions program will provide a total of up to $50 million to sites right across British Columbia. And that will include, of course, tour bus operators who will be eligible because they bring people to many of these attractions, day after day, month after month, year after year. This is, of course, a grant, not a loan, and that means it can be used for a number of things to offset fixed costs like payroll, rent, utilities, and other costs that have been accrued over the past number of months. All of this with the goal of making it easier to restart and ramp up operations when it's safe to do so. There's more to do to support tourism, to be sure, but this is a critically important first step. It helps us to fill the gaps that were identified by the Tourism Task Force, which was put together at the request of the industry. Overall, it supports midterm recovery and long-term resilience for the tourism industry. We all want to enjoy the iconic attractions that make British Columbia so special. And I'm going to ask Minister Melanie Mark now to share some of those details with you as we prepare to welcome the world back to British Columbia again when it's safe to do so. Over to you, Mel.
Thank you, Premier. Simgiget, Sigidamanak, Gibit Wiltsik. Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Mark. My Niska name is Lahaikwaskak, and I'm very proud to be BC's Minister for Tourism, Arts, Culture, and Sport. I'm also the first and only First Nations woman to get elected in BC and to serve in BC's cabinet. I'm proud to be Niska, Gitsan, Cree, and Ojibwe, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations whose territory we're coming to you from. Thank you for joining us from all parts of the province to hear about further supports for the tourism sector. As the Premier said, the COVID-19 pandemic has had devastating and long-term impacts on tourism businesses. From small businesses trying to stay open safely and keep people working to rent payments and cash flow for large organizations, we know the hardships people in the tourism industry continue to face. Throughout the pandemic, our government has worked with tourism leaders to listen to their feedback and provide additional supports. Major anchor attractions and tour bus companies have faced unique challenges across our tourism ecosystem. They play a vital role in our economy. They are key employers in local communities. Businesses across the province rely on anchor attractions to draw visitors to communities, to visit the gift shops, the restaurants, and other attractions in the area. Tour bus companies are vital to make these regional destinations and experiences accessible for travelers. Today's announcement means we're taking action to ensure these important institutions can continue to create jobs, contribute to local culture, and draw people back to BC once it's safe to do so. Many major attractions, anchor attractions, and tour bus operators continue to face significant liquidity challenges. The loss of these organizations would undermine the tourism industry's short-term recovery prospects and significantly impact jobs in the tourism sector. There is up to $50 million in supports, as the Premier mentioned, through the BC Major Anchor Attractions Program. Major anchor attractions in urban centres that receive 75,000 or more visitors per year are eligible up to $1 million. Major anchor attractions in rural areas that receive 15,000 or more visitors per year, and tour bus companies that serve 30,000 or more passengers per year are both eligible for up to 500,000. Supporting anchor attractions and tour bus companies will help maintain vitally important tourism infrastructure. It also has a strong ripple effect, as the Premier mentioned, on our youth. Many tourism attractions provide invaluable work experience, job, and life skills training for young people, and in some cases help students pay for their post-secondary education. The bottom line is, people are our economy, and when people are working, our economy works. Starting today, the province will be accepting applications from anchor attractions and tour bus companies throughout BC. As the Premier said, these are grants, not loans. It's a very, very exciting day for the industry. The application window will be open until Monday, June 7th, with funds provided by July 2021. I strongly encourage organizations to apply because we want these supports to help major anchor attractions and tour bus companies weather the impacts of COVID-19 now, so that BC remains a globally competitive destination of choice in the long term when we safely invite visitors back to our beautiful province. With almost 60% of eligible British Columbians vaccinated, there is reason to be hopeful. Together, we are going to make progress. And on that note, I would like to introduce Jonathan Burke, Board Chair of the H.R. MacMillan Space Centre in Vancouver. He will share the experiences those in the tourism sector face today and how these supports will help. Thank you. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Minister Mark and Premier Horgan. I'm very happy to be part of this announcement. It's very exciting for our organization. To give you some context of what happened to the Space Centre due to COVID, we employ approximately 50 people here in Vancouver at the Space Centre. We had to lay off over half of our employees at the beginning of COVID-19. We've been slowly drawing people back through wage supports and other programs. And our board and our management team immediately focused on three priorities. First, survive as an organization. Second, working on resetting our organization. We went to a lot of online program. We tried to develop whatever programming we could that could get out to an audience that didn't involve on-site visits. But to give you some context of what happened to our on-site attendance, in 2019, we had almost 143,000 people move through the gates at the H.R. MacMillan Space Centre. That went to 33,000 in 2020. Almost a 76% decline. So you can imagine what happened to our revenues. We went from almost 1.2 million in revenues to 270,000 in revenues from gate admissions, a 78% decline in revenue, which was very dramatic, and it was very, very difficult to deal with what happened. In addition, we also provide a lot of educational programs at the H.R. MacMillan Space Centre to school-age children, and our 2020 attendance declined almost 80% for school-age children visiting our site. So it was a dramatic impact. We're now focusing on getting ready for when the pandemic is what we might call over, and that is part of our survive, reset, and now thrive. And these funds from the government will really contribute towards our ability to thrive as an organization as we emerge from the pandemic, to prepare for guests to come back, for all of the associated activities that happen on our beautiful location. And this is just a wonderful day and a wonderful announcement, and I thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, for telling us the story of H.R. McMillan, and thank you, Mel, for laying out the details of this exciting opportunity for the major tourism attractions here in British Columbia. And with that, I'll ask the media to pose their questions through Lindsay.
Thank you. As a reminder to everybody on the phone line, please press *1 to enter the queue. You are limited to one question and one follow-up. First question today is from Binder Sargent, CTV.
Hi, I was just wondering how many of these tourist attractions and tour bus operators do you expect will be eligible to apply, and on average, how much funding could they expect to receive?
Go ahead, Mel.
Thank you. So for companies that have over 150 employees, they will be eligible to up to $1 million. For the tour companies and the rural attractions, they will be eligible up to $500,000. There are less than a dozen tour bus companies that we're aware of. With the rural, we've got different attractions across the province. So we're really trying to make this $50 million stretch across the area codes to support anchor attractions that are immovable. As the Premier mentioned, the landmarks in our communities. And so our job right now is to try to get the money out the door today, get people applying today.
Binder, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, and I know that you're speaking about businesses that have 150 employees or more, but there are a number of businesses that have quite a lot less, and they're worried because the wage subsidy and rent relief is being phased out. So they're asking for a reopening plan. And, you know, other provinces, you know, have reopening plans that relate to case numbers. And just wondering, Premier, if you can tell us, you know, whether you are a small operator that has only maybe one employee, or if you are planning events in the industry, is BC going to be announcing that as part of a reopening plan?
Well, thanks for the question. And we have, of course, been providing small and medium-sized businesses with grants for some time now. We revised the program to add an additional top-up for the tourism sector because of the challenges it's faced, mostly those small operators that you identified. We'll be talking, Dr. Henry and Minister Dix and I will be having a press conference next week to talk about the future, talk about where we're going from here, and we'll have more details at that time. But I want to stress for people that we set the May long weekend as a target for the circuit breaker because we need to make sure we reduce cases, we see hospitalizations go down, and we increase our vaccinations. We're right on track, but we're not out of the woods yet. And I don't want to give false hope until we get through the weekend and we look at the data, and then we'll be laying all that out very clearly for the public at that time.
Next question is from Keith Baldry, Global News.
Hi, Premier and Minister Mark. Just wondering about the P&E. They're looking for $8 million, and this program would, if they qualify, I assume they would max out their funding grant at $1 million. Is there another mechanism that your government's looking at to enable the P&E to survive beyond this?
Well, certainly it's attractions like the P&E, not-for-profits, that we had in mind when we developed the program. And I know that the P&E has other options through the City of Vancouver primarily, and we're going to continue to work with both the city and the P&E and, of course, other attractions across the province. But this was designed for the P&E to make the application. I look forward to seeing that material when it comes forward. I know, Keith, the P&E has a particular spot in your heart from your time, like me, working in the tourism sector as a kid.
Keith, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just is any more detail beyond that? I mean, so are you ruling out giving the P&E more money, or is there an option for the P&E to qualify for further funding beyond this particular program?
When the P&E applies for this program, we'll have a better understanding of the challenges that they face, and we'll work with stakeholders across the piece who have a vested interest in the success at Playland and the P&E to make sure that it can go forward. But we have a whole bunch of attractions across the province that have been waiting for this announcement, and I know they're all going to be excited about it, and I'm sure the P&E will be as well.
Rob Shaw, Check News.
Hi, Premier. Wondering if you could list some island attractions that you think are eligible here, like Butchart Gardens. I know you've mentioned in the past the Royal BC Museum, which is technically, I guess, a Crown corporation. Are there major island attractions that qualify here? And also, just on the application deadline, June 7th, I think is 20 days. It seems kind of tight given how these programs require paperwork and that type of thing. So what do you make of that?
Well, on the timeline, Rob, we've been working step by step with the major attractions to put this program in place. So there's no surprises here. You'll see from Jonathan's contribution from H.R. McMillan and others who have made comments as part of this announcement that the industry and the sector was waiting for this. They've helped develop this, so I don't believe there are going to be many bumps along that road. Certainly, Butchart Gardens is the one that springs to mind here on the island, but tourist bus operators as well will be able to access this resource, and that's critically important. We want to, of course, make sure we get as many people to attractions as possible, and the best way to do that is on a tour bus.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
Sure, thanks. Also, Premier, on the tourism issue, would want to know what you may or may not personally be doing about the cruise ship legislation that has passed so far in the United States. Are you meeting with the Alaskan delegation? Are you doing anything kind of personally with the Prime Minister or others on this spot?
Yeah, I received correspondence from Senators Sullivan and Murkowski when they were bringing the legislation forward. They made it clear in that correspondence that this was going to be a temporary measure until such time as border restrictions were lifted. So I'm taking great comfort in that. The legislation is specific about that. I have talked to the federal government about borders and how we're going to respond, not just to the cruise sector, but in fact the entire world. And those decisions and discussions are ongoing. But I will say that the notion of technical stops at British Columbia ports, if that will assist the industry to be maintained, we're happy to talk about that. But before there's a cruise ship going up and down the west coast of North America, the U.S. Center for Disease Control has to approve that. The federal government will have something to say about that as well. From my perspective as the head of a subnational government that has a long coast that welcomes the world and welcomes tour ships by the many, many hundreds with literally hundreds of thousands of passengers, we want to see that come back. We want to see that come back strongly, but it's not going to happen in the next number of weeks. And at this point, it's not going to happen until next season. But with vaccinations going as well as they are, with case counts and hospitalizations going down here in British Columbia at any event, we're feeling confident. But it's not just about BC, it's about North America, it's about the world, and we have to gauge with our federal partners what's happening elsewhere before we open the doors to people from somewhere else.
Next question is from Katie DeRosa, Vancouver Sun.
Hi, Premier. I'm just wondering to what extent is the province actually consulting with tourism operators and the tourism industry on the restart plan? Because, again, many of them are asking to be included and asking for that roadmap so that they can plan for the summer. So what level of involvement do they have on the reopening?
Well, it's been significant, and I'll pass it to Mel to talk about the details. But we have, from the beginning, been working with industries, not-for-profits, labor, communities to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I believe the success we've had in British Columbia, although there have been bumps along the way, relative to other jurisdictions is a direct result of the communication that we've had, government to business to labor to not-for-profits, and also, of course, with our federal partners and municipal partners as well. I'm very proud of the work that all of us of British Columbians have done to get to where we are, but a few more days yet. And I'll ask Mel to go into the details about her discussions with the tourism sector.
Great, thanks for the question. Yeah, we struck a tourism advisory table. Dr. Bonnie Henry has attended 4 of the 4 meetings to hear firsthand what the concerns are, so that, of course, the PHO is alive to the issues, that government's alive to the issues and the solutions and the calls to action. Right now, we're striking working groups. That's a plan moving forward to drill down, because not all of the sectors are the same. They're not all equally impacted by the pandemic, but the Tourism Advisory Table is giving us that advice. We're working closely with them in tandem. You know, Cabinet, the senior officials are all working around the clock so that we've got good news to come shortly, but they are at the table because we need them to tell us what they need for the immediate and medium and then long term as we move through this pandemic. Thank you.
Katie, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, and what about the restaurants in terms of indoor dining? Will they be able to reopen after the May long weekend? Are they being given sort of a heads up so that they can get the necessary supply and hire back staff if needed? Like, what's the plan for indoor dining?
Well, again, Katie, all of those plans will be laid out next week, but be assured that we are in discussion with the hospitality sector, have been for a long, long time, and we will give as much notice as we can. I want people to understand, though, that we are not out of this yet. The circuit breaker remains in place until next week, and people need to adhere to that. We are so close, and we need to just keep going for a little bit longer. I'll also add to your question, because Melanie has a unique distinction at the cabinet table overseeing tourism, which has been struggling, but also film, which was one of the first industries in British Columbia to put in place safe operating practices. And we have seen record numbers of television and film sets in British Columbia since the pandemic began, and that's a testimony to the hard work of the sector to make sure they had plans in place. And we have tried almost in every sector. Tourism is the big challenge, is no people. If you're not having people come, you're going to have difficulty having people go through the turnstiles, as Jonathan said about H.R. McMillan. But when it comes to other sectors that Melanie has been working with, we've been finding safe ways to operate that have continued to keep people employed and to continue to keep people focused and active on getting out of COVID-19 and back to better days in the months ahead.
Richard Zussman, Global News.
I'm just wondering, Premier, whether there'll be any eligibility requirements here for organizations that already have received substantial grants. You mentioned some of the provincial grants, there are federal grants, where there are some anchor attractions like the PNE who have received almost no financial support. So is that weighed in here? And are you unfairly putting the burden of the PNE all on the shoulders of the city of Vancouver, which doesn't have the same sort of access to funds as your government does?
Well, I don't think we're doing anything unfairly. The city has primary responsibility for the PNE, not the province. And the PNE could have applied, I'm confident, for some of the federal programs if they had chose to do so. We're confident that this program is available to them. We're excited about that, and we're going to, of course, continue working with the PNE, the board, and others at the city to make sure that it can come back better than ever in the year ahead, and that's our commitment. But we have a whole bunch of other balls in the air, as I've said, and we're comfortable that this is going to land well for the vast majority of the major attractions in BC.
Follow up, Richard?
There's a conversation being had about the future of the Oakland A's, and one of the locations that Major League Baseball is potentially looking at is Vancouver. Would you be supportive of a province of a Major League Baseball team moving to British Columbia?
100%. I was ecstatic to work with the Canadians, Vancouver Canadians, when there was the prospect of them potentially moving out of Vancouver. I spoke with management and ownership, in fact, at that time, and was delighted to see the C's stay in Vancouver. Now, of course, we need to address a whole bunch of other issues before we get a ball thrown and a bat swung. But if there was a prospect of bringing MLB to Vancouver, I would be right behind that. And so I know Minister Mark would be very enthusiastic as well.
Tanya Fletcher, CBC.
Yeah, Premier, the hospitality sector has been desperate for a restart plan. You kind of talked about it a bit earlier, but, you know, Dr. Henry hasn't ruled out extending the current restrictions past May 25th. So what do you say to hotel operators specifically, wondering if, you know, the peak summer season might be a write-off for them if non-essential travel among the regions remains in place beyond this long weekend?
Yeah, I certainly understand the challenges, Tanya, and thank you very much for the question. But I also know that the vast majority of British Columbians support keeping our borders closed. They support non-essential travel being restricted until such time as we see the impact on our hospitals, for example. Our frontline workers, our healthcare workers have been stressed to the max over the past 15 months, and we do not want to see a spike in cases that will lead to an increase in hospitalizations. And that's why Dr. Henry has put in place, I believe, a thoughtful plan, and she has talked, as Melanie said, to the sector repeatedly about what the challenges are and what are the metrics that we'll be looking for, and we'll be laying that out in more detail next week, and the industry knows that.
Tanya, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I believe in question period, Minister Mark had said that you will be meeting with Alaskan senators in the coming days. But a few moments ago, you gave no indication that would be happening, only suggesting that you had early communication with them or from them. So can you clarify whether you will be having new discussions with them this week and what those might entail, if so?
My office has made requests for meetings with both Senator Sullivan and Murkowski, and we haven't settled a date yet. I know I'm meeting with Governor Inslee later this week, and I didn't want to announce a meeting that has not yet been set. But the overture has been made, the letters, the correspondence has been going back and forth. I have to say both senators have been very proactive about this. They understand the positive relationship between Alaska and British Columbia. They don't want to diminish that in any way, but they want to stand up for their sector, and I absolutely support that.
Next question is from Lisa Yuzda, News 1130.
Hi, Premier. Following up on what some other people have asked, you're saying that when you get these applications in, you will look at what companies or what attractions need, aquarium, science world, different places. $1 million is not enough for many of these. So what can or will be done to bolster that, considering that this summer is looking a lot like last summer, meaning people aren't going to have the tourism that they had previously?
Well, I'm more optimistic about the summer than you, I guess. I've seen 56% of British Columbians who are eligible get a first dose. I've seen almost an endless supply now being provided by the federal government, which of course we would have all loved to have seen in January and February, but it's here today. We've seen a decline in case counts. The 7-day rolling averages are very positive. The impact on hospitalizations and acute care is very positive. So I'm optimistic that come the summer, we're going to be having full mobility. But right now, I don't want people to hear Horgan say, let's go out and party, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we have all done a great deal to get here, and we'll have more to say next week.
Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
I do, because full mobility here in the province, even in Canada, still will see hotel operators, attractions, bus drivers, all of these locations, whether big cities or rural, probably worse in rural areas, not bringing in the money they had last, 2 years ago. So will there be more money available if they're seeing the same kind of hard-hit summer, or even a bit better than last summer? Will there be more money available for these businesses, these tourism-based businesses?
Well, again, I put a lot of emphasis on our vaccine program and immunization, not just in Canada and North America, but indeed around the world. We are not going to be leaving COVID behind on July 1st. It will be with us for the foreseeable future. What will change is how we manage that risk. And those risks are better managed by having a fully immunized community that can welcome others from around the world who are in a similar position. There are a lot of hoops to go through yet, a lot of discussions with the federal government and international partners for that matter. And I'm optimistic that we're going to have a much better summer this year than we did last year. But I don't want anyone to be under the illusion that we're going to flick a switch or snap our fingers and all of a sudden we're back to what we were at, because that's not going to happen. But we are in a good place, and we have committed from the beginning of this pandemic that the province will be there for people, for businesses, and for communities as long as we have to. But I don't want to predict the day we announce a $50 million grant program where the gaps are going to be 2 weeks from now. When they make themselves clear, we'll deal with them at that time. What I do know is that we consulted widely on this program. We took direction and advice from the sector, and we put this in place, and it's going to be well received. Will we be done now? I don't believe so, but this is a good start.
Amy Smart, Canadian Press.
Hi there. I'm wondering if you can give a ballpark figure on how many anchor attractions are eligible for this or would be sharing the funds.
Go ahead, Mel.
So some of our numbers suggest that there could be up to 40 for the rural, up to about 40 in Vancouver, the more urban, maybe 30. This is, with all due respect, new terrain for government to be handing out grants to a sector. And, part of the call to action is because we're in the middle of this global pandemic. But examples could be Museum of Anthropology, Bouchard Gardens, Capilano Suspension Bridge, P&E, Science World, Wildlife Places, attractions attractions that have, as the Premier mentioned, that kind of landmark quality. It's immovable. And those tour operators are also going to be essential to mobilize and move folks between destinations, which is why we've included them, because they're the lifeline to get visitors to these attraction sites. The reason why we've opened the window to June 7th is we know that we need to get the money out the door, which is why we want people to apply as soon as possible, assess what their needs are, and get the checks out the door so that we have these destinations of choice and those anchors available post-pandemic for years to come. Thank you.
Amy, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we've talked about the PNE, but more broadly speaking, do you genuinely believe this is enough money to prevent any of these anchors from going under?
Yes, I do. I think both of us would answer the affirmative on that question. And again, this is we have been developing programs for the past 15 months that didn't exist in BC before, didn't exist at the federal level before. This is uncharted territory every time we make a new announcement, and every time we do, we better refine the criteria to make sure we can get the money out quickly. And Melanie and her team have worked very closely with the tourism sector to make sure that we've got all of this covered and corralled, and $50 million will be significant as we go into the summer of 2021. And if there's more to do, we're certainly open to that discussion. And I don't know if Mel, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was an earlier question maybe by Lisa. This is along a menu. There are a number of grants that we've put out the door. The sector has asked for grants, not loans, so people don't have to pay it back. There's also funds that have come from the federal government in their 2021 budget, which are very promising, and we are going to be advocating that BC gets its share for events and festivals. So I think this will help, and we're alive to being at the table with the sector to understand what the needs are as we move our way through the pandemic. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. That comes from Rob Buffum, CTV Vancouver Island.
Oh, thank you for taking my question. I guess I wanted to confirm that this $50 million is not new money. It's money that was announced back in the budget last month. And I also wanted to get your reaction to concerns from, it's been raised earlier, but concerns from tourism industry folks who say we really need a plan because wholesalers are trying to figure out the year 2022 plans, and the tourism industry doesn't have a plan yet that they can pass on. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I can tell you that I was on a website yesterday looking to see how easy it was to get a flight anywhere. And every time I put in Vancouver to anywhere, they said cannot sell. So this is not about BC. This is about the world. We're in a global pandemic. We are a better place than many because of the hard work of British Columbians to get to a place where we can have more travel, we can have more economic activity. And the other bit of good news is that the pent-up desire of British Columbians to go and see their friends, to go to places that they always meant to go to, but the past year they've been barred from going to, means, I believe, that come this summer, there is going to be a lot of people moving around, seeing things they've never seen before, spending that discretionary dollars that they do have in their pocket to stimulate and boost activity right across BC. And I'm excited about that. But to suggest, and I know you weren't suggesting in your question, but to suggest that BC is isolated in this case is just not true. The challenge we have is that the world is gripped by this, and we've seen on the nightly news different jurisdictions having different reopening strategies, all of them tied to vaccinations. I know the UK, my eldest son lives in London, England, and the freedoms that he has to move around had been severely restricted for a long, long period of time. But he and his spouse are going traveling next week. They're really excited about it. And that's because of the vaccination program in the UK. As we continue with our vaccination program here, unprecedented in its success, in my opinion, we'll be in a better position to not just plan for 2022, but I think get a good kickstart on 2021.
Rob, do you have a follow-up?
I do. It's on behalf of a colleague who's doing a story about legions in BC who are upset that they haven't received funding from the province in relation to the circuit breaker grants. What's your response, Premier, to legions who are upset that they haven't got funding during this tough pandemic time, and might there be any financial funding coming their way?
Well, there have been opportunities for Legions to apply for a range of programs over the past year, whether it be assistance with rent, assistance with wage subsidies, if they're rehiring after a protracted closure, the province will help there. The federal government has helped as well. But the circuit breaker was designed for for-profit businesses, and regrettably, the Legion, which I support 100%, just got my renewal paid and in the mail yesterday. I believe that we will have to look with the federal government and with local governments who have an ability to help shape the Legions in their community, how we get forward from here. But we all know that this has been a year like no other, and I look forward every year to Remembrance Day ceremonies in Langford and in Souk at both of the Legions in my community, and I know people across Canada feel the same way. What I can predict without any doubt is that November 11th, 2021 will be a day filled with people reminding ourselves of the sacrifices others have made for our freedoms, and then sharing in those freedoms by going to a cenotaph, going to a Legion, and supporting those not-for-profits, and maybe making a donation beyond the usual donations that are given at that time of year. I call on all British Columbians to look to their Legions and see what they can do to help them through this difficult time. But the circuit breaker was designed for-profit businesses. We're going to continue to look at ways to help the Legion, but again, I appeal to everyone in their communities to recognize and acknowledge the great work that's done by our Legions, mostly volunteer work, and go in and do what you can to help out.
That's all the time we have. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Melanie. Thanks, Jonathan.